All right, so today we're going to have our first look at our mortgage project, and this is the general idea. We are going to investigate kind of, I guess, the outcomes of mortgages on our finances. Nah, you don't have to write this down. I'm just going to be kind of describing it and outlining it. Today we're going to work on a spreadsheet. So basically, this is the project description. You are going to find, two houses. All right. One, I will say, I don't know, would probably be a content home, and then what we'll consider your dream home. I would recommend that your dream home perhaps would even still be within some sort of feasible budget, but you can use this project however you want, right? I mean, like if you want to pretend you're going to be a multi-billionaire when you're older, I'm fine with that. But in terms of like valuable information that you'll be able to pull from this, your dream home should be something that you could afford, but maybe like you'd really be strapped, like where you wouldn't be eating anything from your fridge. Like you'd have nothing to eat, you'd have no vehicles, all you'd have is this super expensive house that you can't afford to eat. Something like that, right? So you're going to find two houses and figure out what the market value is for them. And we'll also try to figure out what, maybe a modern mortgage rate would be on those. Now, technically, the mortgage rate can be different depending on your credit, but we're just going to work off like whatever basic ones we can see, assuming we all have amazing credit. All right. And what we're going to do is we're going to figure out how much do we spend over the lifetime of the loan. All right. Just to get an idea of what's taking place. And we're going to consider a whole bunch of different lifetimes of loans. For instance, we'll consider like a 10-year, 15-year, and I think they don't they already they go all the way up to like 40-year mortgages nowadays. Like
yeah, 30 is the most common.
Yeah, 30 is a typical one. But we'll consider kind of this range of mortgages, and you'll see that depending on how long the mortgage goes for, you'll end up paying many more times for the house. All right. So we're going to see how much is spent over the lifetime of the loan, and we'll compare, how much do we spend for the content house compared to the dream house. The final part of the project is where we'll consider what if we live in the content house for, say, 15 years. So what if we live in house A for X years, right? Sell it and purchase house B. All right? So we're kind of trading up. So like if you live in your house A for 15 years, and we'll assume that in that 15 years, maybe it was a really content house, and you were actually able to pay off that cheaper house in 15 years, and you get full profit from the sale. All right? Like you sell it, and you get to keep all of that money, and then you put that money in as your down payment on the more expensive house. And then you live the next 15 years until that mortgage is paid off or something like that. All right, so that's what we're considering. Now, the likelihood of this situation is unfortunately less feasible in our current economy, but who knows where we'll be in 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, whatever it'll be anyway. But yeah, you used to be able to kind of flip houses a lot easier when there'd be people to buy them. But in some cases now, you're lucky if you can get your monies back when you sell a house. In some cases, I think in my brother's situation, he sold his house. He used to live up in north of Bellows Falls. I don't remember where in Vermont, but he finally sold his house, and even though he sold it, still is paying $25,000 off on his house that he only lived at for like 4 years.
Depends on which 10-year period you bought the house.
Yeah.
Because anything before 2007, 2006, you're probably, well, if you bought before 2000, you're okay. If you bought from 2000 up, You lost money
Wow.
because the valuation on houses was.
What's it like in?
bogus.
Okay,
It was bogus.
so it was inflated back
It
then.
was totally made up.
Right.
Yep.
So that's kind of the general premise that we're looking at. And then the other thing I want us to consider is before we even start, we got to kind of figure out what sort of monthly payment we can afford, right? Because I mean, just because you can say you can pay off a house in 30 years, like I mean, if those monthly payments are so ridiculous, you might not actually be able to afford those. So let me open up my Excel spreadsheet, and I will end up sharing this with you guys at some point. And what I've started with here is, let's see, I might try to zoom in a little bit more. Let's see, 200 might be too much. We'll see. Well, it's fine for now, for this table. So here what I've got is a yearly salary, all right, for a range from $30,000 to $100,000. I don't know. And the kind of rule of thumb that I've heard in the past is that your rent should be maybe like a quarter of a monthly salary. Is what do you what?
I wish mine was.
Yeah, is it more?
I make half of 30,000.
Right.
For full time.
Yeah. So I mean, there's obviously situations that are different. But when I've been looking at apartments before, the landlord would be like, "All right, what do you make in a year?" And then he'd end up saying, "You can't afford this place." Right. You should be able to pay off your rent theoretically.
25%.
Right. 25% of your income. Right. Doesn't always work. But that's, kind of my general idea. So if that's the case, now what I ended up doing was finding a weekly salary here. I think we'll end up modifying it. But if I divide by 12, that will end up being how much we make in a month, okay? And then we'll divide by 4 and assume that that's what, because each month there's actually 4.3 weeks in a month, so it's not exactly like 4 weeks per month. I think only February would be the one that has that true. So we'll then take that and then divide by 4. And 625 is what we'll get. And then with Excel, there's this cool thing where if I drag this formula down...
That's a quarter of a monthly?
Quarter of your monthly salary. So that's your monthly payment that you can theoretically afford. All right? And now... Yeah, just as a disclaimer, I've never owned a house, so if someone has more valuable input or something they're willing to share, and actually I talked to Miss Langley about this project last year as well, just to get some insight from her, because she used to specifically do the job of figuring out what people could afford and finding really good mortgage deals for individuals and stuff, and ways of kind of win the system as best you can.
What's est mortgage pay you?
Yeah, so this is my estimated monthly payment that we could afford. All right. So if you earn $30,000 a year, theoretically you can afford $625 a month, whether that's an apartment or a mortgage.
Now you got to remember the $30,000 is gross income.
Yeah.
So your month, what your actual take-home pay is going to be probably maybe 3/4 of that or a little more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you get certain things taken out of your pay. Off
Yeah.
the top.
I used to just estimate that you lose about 30%.
I usually go 25.
Yeah.
Depends on,
Yeah, it depends on your health insurance that you choose to get or whatever your work offers you. But yeah, so I mean, like if you're making $100,000, and I mean, in this situation, I don't know, pretend you do end up getting married. I don't know, if you go to college, you get married right out of college. So you can imagine of the income that you and maybe your spouse are making, all right? Or you're going to get a whole bunch of roommates and all of you are going to buy a house together. You can think of what you guys could all afford together. And yeah, I don't know, maybe you're just going to marry super rich and you'll just marry a millionaire. You don't have to worry about it. That's a possibility, I suppose. But the more realistic maybe we make the situation, I think the more valuable information or general ideas you can pull from this project. And it's not going to be a perfect science. For instance, I'm not going to be calculating your tax rate based off of your home or different things like that. We're not going to take into consideration your fuel bill or whether you're living in the north or down south, and the economics of it are a little bit different. But it's going to give us a general feel of what a mortgage would do. Like what's it going to look like. So what I've got here is So wherever, for instance, I think I make around $40,000. So let's say my monthly payment, according to this, is $833, and I'm now trying to figure out, okay, what I'm going to have us calculate here in a moment. We'll have to try to figure this out. If I know my monthly payment, if I know my rate, and I know the number of years of the mortgage, could I figure out what the principal on the house would end up being? All right, so that's what I end up trying to calculate there. We might, maybe we'll actually come back to this one. R is going to be the rate. Now, apparently, some banks, if you have a shorter mortgage, you'll get a better rate. They won't charge you as much interest because you're using their money for less time. All right? But we might end up using just a flat rate or something like that. We'll figure it out. And these rates are technically what I got from last year, and I just stole them off some bank's website. But fortunately, all of these formulas are dynamic, so we'll be able to modify those as we need to. So let's see. So if my monthly payment is that, let's see. Yeah, we'll come back to that one. And then this is what I'm looking for is, so I've got two house situations. So one house that's going to be $79,000, and then here I've got one house at $30,000. And let's see. And we'll allow for a down payment as well. But maybe we'll assume that for starters, well, I think, forget what percent of a house's mortgage is normally a down payment.
It used to be 20, then it's going down to 10. It depends on.
Yeah.
Depends on the. Depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right.
But 10%, I've always known 10%.
Okay.
We could ask Ms. Langley or call bank.
Yeah. Well, let's just assume 10%. So this bank is going to let you, actually, and that's one of the issues with the whole market is that some banks have been very generous in trying to give out loans to people because they want to get money. And then maybe they were too generous and the people can't actually afford the loans. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a little bit of malicious overlending in some cases, and then people can't afford the houses, and then they end up having to foreclose. So banks are actually trying to optimize that, where they do want to make as much money as they can off of people, and be like, yeah, you can afford this, but also they don't want you to have to not be able to afford your house, so then they are then responsible for your house and trying to sell it at a cheaper price or whatever. So let's just assume 10% of your money is down payment. So if I want to calculate that, I'm going to multiply 10% times what number in this table here? 10% of the house's value. What could I multiply by? Times what? Right. Oh, A23, yes. Right, cell A23. And since I'm going to drag this formula down, if I dragged it down now, it would be A24, A25, A26, which I don't want it to do. I want it to be like fixed there. So I'm going to dollar this, which means when I drag it down, it will actually always be referencing A23. So it's kind of like a fixed variable, I guess, or a constant is what it's doing. All right, so let's see. So we got to now figure out what is A. Well, let's see. Which formula am I working with here? Let's write that down. What is our compound interest formula? Right? That's what we're working with if we're compounding continuously. What's the other interest formula if it's not compounded continuously? Does anyone remember?
1 plus r to the t.
1 plus r to the t. And then there's a third type. What if I've got compounded but not continuously? This is like an annual. It's compounded annually in this situation. This one would be 1 plus r over n, where n is the number of times compounded per year. All right. And then I would do to the n times t, because the number of times it's calculating that interest is, many more times. So in our case, I guess that banks typically will calculate the interest 360 times a year. which is a really weird number because it's not technically daily since there's 365 and a quarter days in a year. But I guess that's the number that they choose to do, and I guess it divvies up into months a little bit nicer for them. So that's what I heard. So our n value is going to be 360 in our case. But this is going to be the formula we'll end up using. And what is P again? Could someone describe what P is? What would I be referring to? In our text the other day, I think we called it n naught, n sub 0. So what would that represent? Yeah, it's going to be the initial amount, all right? So that's going to be the price of the house. And A is going to be what?
That's
the final amount at the end of all of those payments, okay? So that's the formula that we're thinking of. So if I want to calculate A, what we're going to do here is use that formula. So this is going to equal, all right, and it's going to be the principal value of the loan, which isn't going to be the $79,000. It's going to be that minus whatever our down payment was. Right? Does that make sense? Because you're not paying the loan on your down payment. They're not going to make you pay interest on that since you didn't take the loan out for that additional amount. And let's see, I'm going to dollar this one here for sake of convenience. And C26, I'm fine if that shifts because it's gonna for that.
What's dollar?
It fixes it so that when I drag this formula down, this cell will always be the reference instead of also shifting that cell reference down. It's just an Excel thing. It's a fixed position thing in Excel. Let's see, so I'm going to multiply this by 1 plus R over N. So where am I going to get that? What's
R is your rate, which is 2.87.
right? So that's going to be cell B26 in this case. And I don't want to dollar that because I do want it to shift, right, depending on which row I'm in. And divide by N. N I said earlier was going to be 360. All right, where it's calculating 360 times per year. And now I'm raising this to what exponent?
365.
NT, so that's going to be 360 times, what's my time?
10 years.
In this case, it's 10 years. And I want that to not be dollar because I do want that to shift depending on what that is. So I can close parentheses. Zeb, what did you ask about 365?
Why aren't you measuring in 365 days a year rather than 300?
Right. Apparently, banks chose to kind of round down just to simplify the way they do all of their work. But I agree. I mean, if they wanted, they could just use Excel and calculate the exact amount every time. Am I right? I don't know. But so this is the formula set up here for us. So I hit Enter. Whoa, what did I do? I might need to give myself more space. No, that's not right. What did we do wrong? Oh, you know what? Do you guys have a guess of what's wrong?
Now, what's the down payment again?
I'll explain that in a moment. We did something wrong with the rate in our formula. What don't I like about...
Got the parentheses. So it's dividing the...
Does it have to be like 0.02875?
Yeah, my rate is currently 2.875, meaning that's like 287.5%. No thank you. Like, whoa. You know, that's no good. So I got to divide that by 100 first. So it's just the rate was thrown out. There we go. All right, there is a number that's more reasonable. So it turns out what this means is for a $79,000 house that you paid $7,900 off of right away. So we're taking out a loan for, just over $7,000. What's that? 71,100, something like that, is the loan. That over the life of that loan, we're paying $94,000 on the loan. So that's on top of this 7,900. All right, so, and that's over 10 years. All right, so now let's drag this down. And now this is going to be the same price of the house, but over more time. All right, so what if I want to do it over 15 years, 20 years, or 30 years? Now, to answer the question about what a down payment is, that's kind of like making an initial, your bank won't just let you show up and like buy a house for zero money. They need like an initial amount that you give them. They won't just give you a flat, like a free loan without having you show some sign of financial responsibility.
So-
Essentially is what, it's a little bit like collateral almost,
It is
except it's
collateral.
their money. It's their money though. You're paying for the house. That's what you're
So
doing.
is A the amount of money you pay over the course of X number of years?
Right. Yes. And that's just for the loan. And then let's see. So then what I calculated here, actually, I think I want to, should I have this include the down payment on it? It doesn't matter. Well, no, because it won't affect our monthly payments. Yeah. So here what I'm going to have us calculate is what A minus P is, which is going to tell us how many times over we spent on the house. But actually, I think I want to do A plus the down payment minus the price of the house. So basically, how much we spent total minus, what the house was actually worth. So just so we get an idea of like how much more money did we spend to get to live in this house without owning it fully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do A, which is this, plus my down
What's the
payment,
B again?
the down payment. I'm just summarizing these a little bit. And I want to subtract this, but I want to dollar that, don't I? So what this cell represents is if I lived at this house for 10 years, made this down payment, I spent $23,000 more than the house was valued. Compared to if I just showed up with cash and I was like, here's, $79,000, give me this house, right? That just for the sake of having a loan over 10 years, you're paying $23,000 more, all right? And then let's drag this down. And if I lived in that house for 30 years with a loan, I'm paying $156,000 on top of the price of the house to have a loan for 30 years. All right, so that is almost paying for the house 3 times over. All right, just to give you guys that idea. So if you're considering getting a mortgage, I just want you to realize the bank isn't some super generous friend of yours that's giving you money. Like, they are making a lot of money off of you over the life of the loan, right? They're not suckers in the situation. They know what they're doing, right? They know what they're doing. So it's definitely working out. And you did get a benefit of living in a house for 30 years, right? You lived in the bank's house for 30 years, and at the end of that 30 years, it's your house, So like you do gain the value of that investment. And who knows, maybe in 30 years, what if that house is suddenly worth a lot more money? It also could be worth a lot less. So who knows what happens. Then let's see. And then I just wanted to figure out what would the number of months on that loan have been and what would the monthly payments be. So how many months happened in 10 years? Right? So I could do that by taking 12, the number of months in a year, multiplying by how many years took place. So over 120 months. And if I wanted to figure out my monthly payments, I would take my A value, all right? This is excluding the down payment, and divide by how many months there were, right? And it turns out it's not that bad, right? So $789 a month for a $79,000 house with a down payment of that amount over 10 years.
So is monthly pay calc A divided by the number of months?
Yep. So that's just what are you having to pay the bank every month for them being so generous in buying your house for you. So, and now since this is dynamic, that means I can plug in, $100,000 house, and everything shifts, and I can see, okay, monthly payment over a 10-year mortgage would be about $1,000 for a $100,000 house.
How come the 20-year is always less expensive than the 30?
Yeah, isn't that weird?
What's your interest rate? You said
The interest rate is different. Yeah, if I make this the same.
Yeah, the shorter your loan period, the lower your interest rate is going to be.
Right. Because it's less risky for the bank. If you're only signing up for 10 years, they're like, okay, we'll get our money back in 10 years. But if you want to sign up for 30 or 40 years, it's like, you better pay us some money because we're going to charge you a little bit more. It's more risky for them to do that. But yeah, what's interesting here is that the 30-year monthly payment ends up being more than the 20. And yeah, it is just because of the rate. So these might vary a little bit. Like I said, it's not necessarily guaranteed. Right, yeah. So Eli, you're exactly right. Yeah, it would, if you could, it would make sense to pay it off in less time than that. Pay it off in 20. And if I wanted, I could even actually throw in a 25-year and a 30, and then just drag these formulas down if we wanted to. And yeah, so it actually makes, in some cases, less sense for some of these, right? And that's because this is an exponential curve. So like at some point, like it's getting so crazy steep that it's not worth expending the time where it's working against you so much. So this isn't, 100% realistic because we are, simplifying the problem a little bit. But nonetheless, the general idea is the same. I mean, if I make all these interest rates consistent. Actually, yeah, where did the 4.87 come from? Did I program these rates? Oh, you know what? It generated a pattern from that and assumed that it would be 4.87. But that's not necessarily the case. So let's just, I don't know. And we can look that up online if we want to get more accurate data on it. But yeah. So, but actually, this is interesting. So for a $100,000 house, over 20 years, you're paying for it twice. So if you just waited 20 years and saved up all of your money and somehow lived free in a tent in the woods, you could have bought two houses. So that's something to consider. I think
Another way to make that amount of money at the end to be smaller is to put $100 or $200 on your principal every mortgage payment or once if you can, and that'll bring down the principal really fast, and you won't have to end up paying so much.
So instead of paying against that lump sum, you have to make your actual monthly payment and then put a little bit extra, and I think you have to specify with them and say, put this towards the principal.
Yeah, or write a separate check.
Right.
But you have to make sure that in your contract you're able to do that too, because some contracts are written where you can't pay up, you can't pay it off.
And I know car loans will do that too sometimes, where they will front load all of the interest. Mm-hmm. So even if you're paying extra, you're only paying the interest as if you weren't paying extra and you were going to pay like the full 4-year loan or 3-year loan or whatever. Really so that's what she's saying is you want to pay against the principal, which is what that interest rate was being calculated off of.
Yes, then instead of paying for $100,000 houses.
Right. Yeah. So I think what we'll do is we'll time out on the Excel spreadsheet so you guys can start doing some initial research. Save everything you can on your Google Docs or something, or email yourself all of the data, like save the links. And then we'll continue with doing some more of this tomorrow and make this available. So just so you can get an idea. And so you can go from there. So yeah, we'll do that. So I'm going to time out for now and have you guys start researching. I'll be around to help you.